welcome to my first ever video tutorial. The technique for today is upper string vibrato. Now there are a lot of different ways and philosophies that you can use when you're trying to think about your vibrato. But one thing that I always like to think about in order to get my vibrato going is the idea of sound before sight. When I say sound before sight, I mean that you really want to try and aim for the sound of your vibrato before it looks pretty. Now, a lot of young students that I teach, they will always say, oh, but it's just so difficult to make sure I have my vibrato. I just can't get, I don't move my arm like you. How do I do it? And my first response to those students is, how does it sound? Now, the sound of it is so important. And in fact, in my personal opinion, if you can get a sound that you like, first and foremost, then we can refine the technique later. So I want you to really listen in when you try to use your vibrato and determine what kind of sound it is that you're going for and really aim for that. Now, that's not to say that you should use all sorts of goofy physical things to make sure you get your vibrato. You know, I don't want you to move your instrument instead of your hand or your arm, but something to think about, right, is to make sure you have the sound first. So what is vibrato, first off and foremost? So vibrato is an intentional bending of the pitch when you play on any instrument. For string instruments, it looks like your hand moving back and forth on the strings, and it kind of looks like I'm slightly shifting up and down. If I do it really slowly, you can see how far back it wants to roll. You can do vibrato with any finger, and it's really the shifting back and forth. Now, one important thing to think about with vibrato is that your finger actually wants to stay where it is on the string. You don't want to entirely lose your pitch, but you do want to change it just a little bit. So, in order to understand that technique of vibrato, I like to start bigger and then get smaller. So one exercise that I really like to do before I start my vibrato, I call it polishing the strings. And so what we do is we take our arm, we make sure it's out nice, we have a straight wrist, some space between the elbow and the side and the ribs, and then we're just going to take our fingers, all 4 fingers on the strings, go all the way up, make sure you bring your thumb with you, up the strings, and right back. All the way back to the scroll, up to the bridge, back to the scroll, to the bridge, to the scroll, bridge, scroll, bridge, scroll, and you speed it up as you go. Now, as you speed it up, you want to think about getting smaller and smaller and smaller until you eventually focus in on one point. When you focus in, you want to try and put that finger down and then let that arm just work back and forth as smoothly as it was with your fingers still down on the string. And this is a technique you can repeat for all the fingers. So if I'm trying to do my second finger, well, I take that second finger, polish the string, smaller, smaller, aha, right there. And you can go slowly. There's nothing saying that you have to go extremely fast to start. Now, my vibrato looks a little relaxed, but I've been doing this for a few years. So if your vibrato doesn't look like this right away, that is okay. It does not have to look like this right away. So I've got the rolling motion on that finger, polish here. The pinky's always the hardest one for me, and a tip for that, again, with everything, you want to make sure your thumb stays right in place. If I can get that on the camera. You want to make sure your thumb stays right in place. And then a tip for the pinky, you can take the rest of the fingers and actually bring them up off of the fingerboard. If you try and do that with all 4 fingers down, you're going to have a bad time. So you want to bring them up so your pinky can be nice and free. Another technique I like to use to try and warm up those vibrato muscles is to have my fingers right on the edge of the instrument. And I do that same motion but with all 4 right on the shoulder of the instrument. So I just go in and out with my arm, in and out. And I keep those fingertips right where they are. And that helps with that back and forth motion as well. In, out. And the whole time, you really don't want to squeeze down on the instrument. You're not trying to clamp down, you're not trying to play super hard, but you're just letting it roll back and forth. Slightly roll. Try slower, then faster. And when you're using your vibrato in music, you can have all sorts of vibrato speeds to help with your expression. So when I'm playing, say, this note right here, this E, if I go slower, you hear a much wider sound. And if I go faster, sounds much more narrow. So we have different kinds of vibratos, and you should probably practice them at different speeds in order to develop those. But for starters, I really like the string polishing, and then I really like that rocking of the hand back and forth. And those are two exercises that you can use in order to develop your vibrato. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned a few things today. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.